Thank you so much. It's great to be with all of you with this very wonderful panel and all of you out there. And I'm not exactly sure where you're all from, but I'm excited to share this time with you. I have X amount of minutes to really take you on a pretty extraordinary journey. So what I've done is I've carved this down into a manageable format. I'm going to move quickly through these slides. And as Aruna pointed out, the panel part of this will be recorded, not the discussion part. So you'll be able to go back later on and look at the slides and listen to it if there are things that you wanted to see that you didn't have time to spend. As Krish pointed out, I've worked in this field now. This will be my 45th year working in LGBTQ health and mental health. I started this project because no one had studied the families of LGBT young people and their families. And I knew, of course, what a critical role families play. And that's exactly what we found in our research, that families of LGBTQ young people play an absolutely essential role in contributing both to serious health risks and promoting well-being. I can't really talk about acceptance on its own because rejection in most of our cultures is the default position. So I have to frame it against the body of what's happening in our cultural and social worlds. And that's, of course, how we did our research with the lived experiences of LGBT young people and their families. We know from research that's been done over many years that connectedness, being connected to others, is a critical protective factor. It protects against health risks and mental health risks. And we also know from recent research that when young people feel connected at school and home, they're 2/3 less likely to experience risk behaviors related to substance use, mental health, violence, sexual health in adulthood. That's a pretty powerful statement because if we can create support, a positive sense of self, wellness, validation, affirmation in our young people early in their lives, it has a powerful impact later on. We know with LGBT young people that they experience a whole wide range of significant health concerns related to stigma and rejection. This is true both for adolescents and adults. If we look at some of the studies of the whole population in the US, and I know there's a lot of research outside the US, but I'm focusing now on US-based research. We can see from studies of the whole population of students that 29% of lesbian, gay, bisexual students and 35% of transgender students had attempted suicide in the past 12 months. This is significantly higher than their heterosexual or cisgender peers. They also experience higher rates of post-traumatic stress disorder compared with non-LGBTQ related peers. And all of these risks have existed before COVID, before the pandemic. And we know now that the pandemic, which is going to be with us for a considerable period of time, will have a greater impact, largely because of the isolation and the disruption of lives and the loss of key family members and cultural leaders, and also being sequestered with families that are rejecting and unsupportive. So if we look at all of the major kinds of negative health outcomes that LGBT young people and adults experience, there are a lot of them. We've seen this in the research going back to the 1970s with adolescents and the 1960s with adults. In terms of all of these negative outcomes, the exciting news is that family intervention, family support, family affirmation can make a powerful difference and change these outcomes. And I want you to keep this in mind because really that's what our research showed at the very beginning and moving forward. We also know that young people are coming out at much younger ages than they ever were before. Now, 10% of California students identify as LGBT, 4.5% of the US adult population, 2% of high school students identify as transgender. And In California, where they first began to study this, more than 1 in 4 California youth are seen as gender diverse by their peers. This has important implications for risk, for visibility in families, and the inability of children when they're younger to hide who they are. They're coming out. We can't stop them from coming out. We want them to be supported. And those are incredibly important messages to give families and religious leaders and cultural leaders. We started the Family Acceptance Project. We started planning it really in the 1980s based on work that I've been doing in different parts of the US with different populations. I wanted to do the first research on families with LGBT young people and then put that into practice by developing an evidence-based model that could help diverse families learn to support their LGBT children in the context of their cultural and religious values and beliefs, even if they felt that being gay or transgender was wrong. So we did a lot of research over a period of years. We started with a really incredible interview-based study where we collected thousands of pages of individual transcripts, and in those transcripts learned an enormous amount about families and identified over 100 specific behaviors that parents and caregivers use to respond to their LGBT children. We measured those behaviors in a survey of LGBT young adults, and we took that out to really diverse families and LGBT young people. We actually did this part of our work in 5 different languages, and we had families and LGBT youth and young adults teach us what our research meant to them, how to present our findings, how to talk about them, what kinds of materials were needed to help families from their cultural worlds learn to support their LGBT children. And we used all of that information to develop a family support model that we've been implementing in different kinds of settings. So we actually took the experiences of adolescents that we measured, and we then connected those with the experiences of LGBT young adults. So we could show, for example, how religious and cultural experiences, and specifically accepting and rejecting behaviors, affected their risk and well-being as a young adult. These are some of the more than 100 accepting and rejecting behaviors that we identified and measured. These are very common. You will be familiar with them. Silence and secrecy, preventing young people from learning about their identity or participating in LGBT activities, denial versus supporting their gender expression, or standing up for them when others mistreat them because of who they are, requiring that other family members respond with respect, even if they disagree. And we measured all of these behaviors. And so we could show that the more of these rejecting behaviors, the higher the level of risk. And you can see these really staggering levels of health risks when young people experience a lot of family rejection in adolescence. By the time they're a young adult, we see an 8 times greater likelihood of attempted suicide in young people who've experienced a lot of those rejecting behaviors and these other negative outcomes. We also saw the opposite, because acceptance is not the opposite of rejection. There's so many more factors that are involved. But one thing that was the same was that the more accepting and supportive behaviors, the lower the level of risk and the higher the level of wellness, including better family relationships, higher self-esteem, better overall health, and much less likely to have significant health problems. We saw that when parents and caregivers and families supported that young person, accepted them, the higher the level of acceptance, the more likely that young person was to believe that they could have a good life. And of course, we know that sense of the future affects so many things. It affects self-care, self-esteem, who's in your life, who's in your world, your ability to plan for the future, to plan for a career, to be in relationships with people who care about you and are good to you, are kind to you. We also, everything we measured actually that was a wellness factor in our lives. The more acceptance, the better they did. So, for example, young people who came from extremely accepting families were much more likely to want to be a parent themselves versus those who did not. One of our team members, Stephen Russell, did a really important study that I wanted to mention, which is about use of chosen name and pronouns. And Stephen and his team found that when transgender young people could use these names and pronouns at home, school, work with friends, they reported significantly lower levels of serious depression and a 65% decrease in suicide attempts. This having evidence-based information is critical because a lot of times we're challenged by family members. Why should we do this? Or this is wrong, or this is against what we believe, or it's shameful to the family, or other kinds of rejecting responses, when we have research that shows that behavior that many people think might be helping a young person is actually putting them at great risk, significantly increasing health and mental health problems. It's a very powerful motivator for families and others to change. So, of course, you can't just do research, you have to turn it into tools and resources, and that's what we've done. We don't really have time to talk about that, but we wrote the first best practice resources for LGBT young people in the best practices registry for suicide prevention. We have this material in English, Spanish, and Chinese, and I'm planning to do a version of this booklet for South Asian families. We also developed these really exciting Healthy Futures posters. They're on our website now in English and Spanish, and I'm working with Aruna and several national API groups to put these in 5 API languages, and I would love to do more of that. These are posters that actually show a range of accepting behaviors and rejecting behaviors, and then these infographics at the bottom. And they range in size from something that you can hang on the refrigerator to a wall poster that could be in a pediatrician's office, in a school, in a waiting room, in so many public spaces. It's all well and good to talk about acceptance, but rejection has been the default position. And we need to change that. We need to change that in terms of cultural worlds and social worlds. We know that rejection has a powerful impact on the future. And one of the ways that we've done this work is to create a behavioral language that enables people to change their behaviors without changing their beliefs. So I encourage you to visit our website, learn more about this work. And of course, I'll be doing more work with Aruna, so you'll get a chance to hear more later on. Thank you very much.
So if anybody does want to follow along, these posts are, I believe, on the QSA Network Instagram page at QSAW Network. And the other one is on Delta Dill, I believe, or we're tagged in it. And so I'm going to essentially talk about, start by giving some insight into my mental health journey over the past 10 years as a queer Desi, and then end with some reflections. So I guess I'll give the trigger warnings of there's like borderline emotional blackmail / toxic family dynamics / queerphobia from Desi households, Desi dynamics. So in terms of navigating sexuality in my South Asian family, so some of the things that I have experienced are remarks that being gay is abnormal and shameful, pressure to get married the heterosexual way, unprompted and misplaced anger, emotional blackmail, for example. I've given you everything I could, how could you betray me? Or think about someone other than yourself for once, you're destroying our lives, or even, why are you doing this to me? So this has, as a result, made me feel, as if there is something wrong with me, but I can't exactly pinpoint what it is, as if I'm a burden to everyone, as if depression is never ending, as if I'm constantly losing my mind, as if I'm a disappointment to everybody, as if I'm unworthy of being loved, vulnerable, extremely vulnerable to staying in toxic or emotionally abusive situations, limited value associated with living in general, constantly feeling drained and exhausted and just trapped and helpless and frequently on edge, and constantly a limited will to exist. And so I've coped in both unhealthy and healthy ways. Thankfully, most of the unhealthy coping mechanisms I have almost successfully worked through. Um, the one to still kind of work through, but is getting significantly better, is binge working, where I tried to associate or reassociate, I guess, my worth with pulling all nighters for days and days in a row to feel like I'm accomplishing something and doing things, primarily throughout my undergraduate degree. Um, but in 2013, I also started community organizing, particularly in queer contexts, and this is where I started finding real community. But some of my better, healthier coping mechanisms kind of kicked in around 2018, which was about 8 years into this journey. And I started by moving out from my master's degree, making a longer term safety plan for myself, finding a queer Desi community, which was very difficult, but I also created that community for myself in some ways. Um, Engaging in mindfulness meditation and journaling. So for me, I feel like I tend to associate my experience with a version of queer survival, because existing as a queer person in South Asian families is extremely draining. Despite being surrounded by many wonderful South Asian queer folks and allies, it is extremely exhausting and lonely to be rejected by my family. My mom is aggressively ignorant to my queerness, and my dad is unaware. Our hush hush culture has kept my parental ties intact for now, because if they acknowledge it, then people will find out. Instead, I'm subject to pretty constant emotional blackmail and repeatedly told to not tell anyone. And if they're um, unaware of how open, and they are currently unaware of how open I am about my sexuality and my personal life, they're not super tech savvy, so this kind of helps my case. And it's been okay and easy ish getting under that label as a vocal activist because of this. But even, getting to that place of having my parents remain silent but not accepting about my activism was extremely difficult and took so many years. And my family stressors have been amplified by the rejection and racism that I experience in queer spaces. The LGBTQ plus community conveys this narrative of like being welcoming, for a welcoming family for those who are rejected by their blood families. However, there's unspoken guidelines to be accepted in these queer communities, is that you must be white. And I'm not white, so I shouldn't be forced to give up my Desi identity in order to be accepted by this queer family. How is that any different from the rejection that I experience in my blood family? Anti-Asian racism is in queer communities is something that's attempted to drive me out one too many times. And everything ranging from, explicit remarks that there's no way I can be queer because I'm brown, to like including from my partners, to like just alienation in queer spaces. Exclusion from both South Asian and LGBTQ plus communities is incredibly lonely. However, my joy and happiness is fueled by my passion and love for the queer Desi community, hence why I organized and I launched the Queer South Asian Women Non-Binary Network. My trajectory and end outcome of better will look different from the prototypical one that we hear in white narratives, but I've learned through my queer experiences that it doesn't matter how I get to my destination as long as I do. So if hope is the only thing that I can have at this point, then I'm extremely grateful that I can be hopeful for happiness someday, because that's a lot more than I had 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or even 1 year ago, when I was threatened to be kicked out of my home by my mom, who was worried that our cousins found out. And I'm going to move on to some reflections to conclude. So over my decade of navigating my queer Desi identity, I've learned that if my family's happiness is what makes me happy, then I may choose a marriage of convenience, or not having that big gay Desi wedding. If my family's queer phobia is damaging to my mental health and remains a safety hazard, then I may choose to distance myself from that, and that's also okay. And if I want to try balancing a middle ground with both identities, then I may choose to never get married, claim my partner as just a roommate, and let my family peacefully live in ignorance with it. And that's also okay. But regardless of my choice, I will not be choosing to be gay instead of Desi. I will not be choosing to be Desi instead of gay. I will be choosing the best context for me to exist as a gay Desi. And I can't even express the amount of inner peace and gratefulness that experienced with coming to terms with this alone. So thank you for listening.
So hi everyone, my name is Sasha. I was born in Bombay, so I've lived almost half my life in India and then the other half here. Let me see if I can, oh, there we go. So I do a little, I think pictures sometimes is a little bit easier, at least for me to follow, so I figured I would do the same. So I kind of put this together really quick. So who's Sasha? Right, so I am a cybersecurity geek, which means that I work in the technology space and I prevent hackers from stealing data. So that's what I do for work. I am an explorer. I like riding motorcycles and I explore all the time. I'm also a parent, and those are my two little monkeys. You know, 5 and 7, boy and girl, done, no more. And that's my community. I joined Satrang as a board member last year, and I'm currently the president of Satrang. Satrang, as you can tell, is 7 colors, is a Southern California LGBTQ org. So part of introducing myself and explaining where things were, my struggles that I came in, were not that long ago. In 2016, I ran into a very nasty split with my partner, and it was pretty bad. I went through some really lows, and I think what got me out of that was literally from a mental health perspective. I had to find family within my community, and I did not find the let's say basic community immediately. So I had to go with what I had, and that's what the little picture in the bottom corner there is. That was my kind of family. But that family helped me fight for my other family, right? And after years and years of court battles and, sleepless nights and lots of like really scary moments, I won custody of my kids. And, in 2018 was the first time like that I actually got a chance to, have them with me overnights. And then it just increased and increased. And that's the birthday with my daughter's birthday we celebrated. And it just grew from there. And you can just tell like the direct impact that having my family with me for the last 2 years of my life have been incredible. Has just made such a huge impact on me professionally, on me as a parent. I think night and day effect as a parent, which to me is like literally the most important thing that I can think of. Let me just stop this really quick. Okay, there we go. So another really thing I'd like to mention a lot is that I've seen especially in this year, being part of Satrang gave me the chance to actually be out there for, there was a couple of younger school-going students who reached out to me, and they were just so lost. And it kind of reflects a little bit about what Sonali was talking about. But what was really sad is they were struggling, and I could tell like they were trying to latch on to someone for help. And a lot of it was, how do we talk to our parents? How do we explain to them when both of them are just not okay? And, it's hard, but the first step was just being there for them. And I feel like being where I am as a parent, and I feel I fall between the little worlds, right? It's between, parents who have trans kids, and then being in the middle of it, you kind of see how the person thinks. So a little bit, I can try my best understanding how my parents were when they were alive. I would imagine what they would do, but I would also know that many times parents always think you're wrong no matter what, right? So if they speak to another parent or they have other people with them, it plays a big role. So, it's just, I feel like there's so much that we can do in that sense. And at least for me, it's sharing and connecting and awareness. And one of the biggest things that I try to promote is awareness, because 9 times out of 10, people just don't understand. They, put things into very generic proportions and say, this is a big group and everyone's in this little group. And there's a huge thing, even for example, on the trans spectrum, right? A transgender person is a whole spectrum. It's not just everyone falls into one bucket. It starts up from the very small to the very end. And I have a massive group of people that I know that fall on every aspect of that spectrum. So there's a lot within, I feel, the LGBTQ space that people don't understand. And, navigating that and helping as much as, whoever I can reach out to, it's kind of something that I try my best to do, but I feel I would never have been able to do it without, my family. And, the only other two people left in my family are my sisters, who were all the way on the other side of the world in India. And, there's 50-50. One of them completely is accepting and is really cool about it. The other one thinks it's a phase, right? And it's not a phase. It's been 4 years and there's no phase. But I'm nipping away at it, right? I'm not ignoring it, but I'm nipping away. I'll send her pictures and do everything I can, but it's getting there. And I know not everyone shares that, but it's much better now than it was, right? So there's always an up to a down.
So hi everybody, my name is Sri. I use she, her pronouns. I am a queer cisgender Bengali woman, and I'm also a doctoral candidate in counseling psychology over at the University of Denver, where both in my clinical work as well as my research is focused on romantic relationships and multicultural counseling, psychotherapy outcomes with diverse populations, especially queer people of color. And then the other fun part of that, which really melds both these professional and personal worlds, is that I'm also the co-founder of an organization called SESMA, which is the South Asian Sexual and Mental Health Alliance. So in all of those, with all of those hats, and I think all of us, Sonali and Sasha, thank you for speaking so beautifully, and really, there was, definitely some emotional moments as well in which you both shared. So thanks for that. So I did want to speak in that same way from a little bit of both the personal as well as kind of those, more professional, clinical, and research hats as well. So I'll start with the personal, which comes a little bit more in terms of what my own coming out story has been. And I am one of those folks who came out really, really young. I was 13 when I first came out to my parents. And that, as Caitlin talked about, I think has been somewhat of a generational thing where I felt more comfortable coming out earlier. And all told, I had a decent reaction in that I certainly didn't get kicked out. I wasn't rejected, but I did essentially just get laughed at and told, you're too young to know, that's nice. And there's a whole fun story about how I was really trying very hard to go to GSA in high school, so Gay Straight Alliance, and my parents were, and I was pretending that it was to help a friend who wanted to come out, and I wanted to support that friend. And I got the classic Indian parents being like, why are you going to GSA? Go to SGA, it's better for you. Go join student government instead. And then having a moment of being like, it's for me. It's because I'm bisexual, it's because I'm gay. So anyway, so over the years, there's definitely been some interesting experiences with that, of, a variety of conversations at this point, close to 15 years ago that I came out, and an ongoing journey with my parents. I think especially now that it is so visible in terms of both my work and my advocacy work, my passions. I started out even in undergrad, I organized Sex Week at the University of Maryland, and I've always had these interests in both sexual health and mental health and kind of how all of those things play in together. So I think as my fellow panelists have also shared, I think there's something to be said about getting involved in community and actually finding space. Honestly, even just having this many queer and allied and gender diverse bases on this call is incredible, and it feels so good to be here because you don't get that often, and so it feels just really good to to kind of carry some of that angst into some of this work and into community building and sharing with one another, because I think it does make a world of difference in terms of how much we really are able to cope and how many examples we have, right? And really wanting to be those touchstones for other generations, as Sasha was saying as well, being in a place where, yeah, you do have some tips and tricks that you can share. And one of the things that I wanted to speak to in particular as well is something, a concept that I like to share around bisexual erasure. And so for a lot of folks who identify as bi or queer or pan in some way, there's kind of this concept of, if you are visibly partnered with somebody, whether they are at least present as the opposite sex or the same sex as you, bisexual erasure basically just says that that's what you get perceived as. So meaning if I identify as a cis woman and in that moment I happen to be partnered with a man, then everyone sees us as a hetero couple when we're kind of out walking the street, and vice versa. That when I'm out walking with my girlfriend, that everybody just assumes that we're both lesbian, but that's not actually true. She identifies as lesbian and I identify as bisexual. So I wanted to bring that up because I think that's also been very pertinent within the Desi community. And that piece of essentially, it really did take until I think I came home with a quote unquote more serious partner that my parents were like, oh, okay, so it wasn't just a phase. Like, she actually did know what she was talking about all of those years ago and has known this whole time. But it is kind of that interesting thing of, my mom literally said to me, I always knew you were interested in both sexes. I just didn't know you were that serious about it. So again, being very aware that those experiences, like, I am very, very blessed to have the parents and the family and community that I do overall, because I do feel like I have very much been accepted, and definitely there are learning curves, as there are always want to be, but within that it has made a world of difference to at least even be able to have these conversations. And I think even I had a very frank conversation with my mom a few months ago, where something she said to me is she's like, I know that I've come a long way in the past 10 years, and the world at large has as well, right? So there has been a lot more information that's out there, and some more amount of normalizing queer and trans experiences, and that does help for people to kind of even increase their latent amount of knowledge. And I've seen that journey with my own folks, with my own community, and it's something that I know that they wish to continue working on as well. So it is kind of that thing of like, okay, I will take kind of the neutral, like, vague acceptance over, hatred or getting kicked out or any of those things for sure. But, maybe one day we'll actually get to the point where it can feel very equitable, and it doesn't have to feel like a different thing at all to be queer or to be a woman partnered with another woman. And so I wanted to wrap up by saying a little bit about SESMA in particular. So SESMA, we hope to absolutely be one of those communities, and obviously hearing about Satrang and QSAW, as well as the Rainbow Parents and Allies, like all of these different spaces, they do exist. We are out there. There are more spaces that are increasing. There are many of us. I mean, obviously we know South Asia is such a huge population. And with that, that means that there's a bunch of us queers out there too. We're there. It's just maybe a little bit less visible. And obviously this is not the room that I need to say this to, but a lot of the, really wanting to emphasize a lot of the impacts of colonialism as well. And this is not anything new to our cultures or our spaces. So thinking of it more so as a reclamation and getting kind of back in touch with our roots and rejecting Westernization or Christian ideals and coming back more into ourselves, and how our cultures, along with so many other cultures in the world, have always promoted fluidity in terms of gender and sexuality. So feel free to, I can drop, oh, Chris, just awesome, thank you. So I can share a little bit. We are, I'll put our handles and whatnot in there, but we're at South Asian SMH on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And then you can also check out our website. We also have a podcast called the Brown Taboo Project. So that's a fun one if you are looking, if you are physically a little bit more isolated, but you want to be in community with queers and kind of, we're not all queer in the org, but talk about these issues in mental health and identity, just everything that it relates to being a South Asian American person or a third culture kid. We've got you covered. And so let us know what we can do.
Assalamualaikum, King Joe, Kikabur, Namaste. I think I've covered as many Indian greetings as I know, and hello. My name is Mehreen Beg, and I'm new to all of this for those of you who I've already met before, only as of 2 years. So I have a 15-year-old who's my transgender son. I have 3 kids, 21 and 18 and 15, and the older 2 are cisgender. I am an immigrant from Pakistan, but I've been raised in Texas and moved to the Midwest, so, and a teacher 26 years. So pretty much American, you know, mentality. And my parents are 82 and 83, and pretty much very Desi mentality. And you know, my son coming out to me 2.5 years ago threw me for a surprise. We had, my ex-husband and I had gone through a divorce at that time, and we thought the kids were going through a lot of stress and everything. But for our son, he was always a unique child. We always thought that he was a lesbian, and we were like, yay, lesbian, come on, lesbian, you know. But when the day that it came where he actually told me 2 weeks after my birthday, he gave me a birthday card that, not a birthday card, but a birth announcement that said B is for boy. And Charlie came out to me that way and said, Mom, I just want you to know that this is me. I've always been a boy, and I hope you still love me, and I hope that, you know, that you know, you'll understand this. And he sat back and he watched me, and he watched my face go into a little bit of surprise. You know, those few defining moments in your life are, as a parent, are the ones that you know that inside, that there are those moments that you might be going like this in your inside, but you have to say, okay, I'm going to love my child unconditionally. This is my child. This is my kid. And we gave each other hugs, and we cried, and I think I was just not ready for the T part, you know, the transgender. I didn't know much about it, quite frankly, not like I do today. But he was my same kid. He told me not to tell his dad. He didn't want to disappoint his dad. And the surprising thing is, his father and I have raised our children to be such open-minded kids. I was raised in an extremely conservative Muslim family. My parents are, like I said, very much kept to themselves in the Muslim circle. We did our 5 times prayer, Ramadan, only we went to the mosque 2-3 days a week, and my parents never had any friends that were outside of their vision of mentality. And you know, here it is that they have a transgender son, and I carried a lot of guilt and baggage within my upbringing, and having to express that to my parents. I knew I was going to be, you know, Charlie was going to be okay because he's loved and he's going to be well taken care of. And his dad and I and his brothers are on his side for everything. Like, he just started testosterone 2 weeks ago, and it was a big deal. And we went to Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago, and we made a day of it, and we had lunch, and he played his theme song from Rocky when he got his first shot. We were so excited for him. But the guilt that comes from me for how that upbringing, that background, the disappointment in your parents, in you, and they think that you've done something to do this. The divorce caused this to happen, or raising their children in America caused this to happen, or not enough Islam. You strayed away from God, and this is God's punishment. So you have to, I had to go through therapy, and I'm still going through therapy, to drop a little bit of that guilt one at a time. And I had to give myself permission to say, I love my kid. That's my baby. You know, I don't care who says what. He's always had those big brown eyes that he, you know, since birth I looked into that said I'm a boy. And I knew that somewhere in your mind as a parent, you know that, right? That you know exactly who they are. My parents and I had to break up our relationship in last December, because I had to protect my kid. I had to protect myself. And, you know, they were always I was growing up, they were always disowning me when I married outside of the culture. I got kicked out of the house with no shoes on in my pajamas in the morning. I was always being disowned for something or the other. This time I wrote them a letter and I said, I have to let you go because I need to raise happy, healthy children who are unconditionally loved. And in order for me to be happy and healthy, I have to say no to your judgment and your disrespect for my kids and for me. And if I tell you right now that I'm fine with it, I'm not. I'm fine with my son. Okay, that's not a problem. I love my kid. I'm not okay right now with the loss of parents. There's still anger within me that they're missing so many moments in his life. He's a great kid. He's a gifted musician. He's academically amazing, an artist. He's funny. And when he did come out to me, by the way, I want to tell you that he had gone through a depression before he actually came out to me, and he was cutting himself because he wasn't feeling like he could be who he wanted to be. So we have gone through a lot with our Charlie, and the last thing I'm going to add to that is grandparents who want to come and lecture him about how it's not okay, and oh, you used to be such a beautiful girl, and no, I can't have that anymore. That's my baby, and I need to protect him.